The encounter. James sat in his dimly lit workshop, surrounded by scattered tools and half-finished gadgets. The faint hum of his old radio filled the room as he focused on repairing an antique drone. For James, this was just another late night. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos, but within these four walls, it was his sanctuary. Suddenly, the lights flickered. James froze, his hand stopping mid-repair. A cold breeze swept through the room, though the windows were closed. He looked around, his heart pounding. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly behind him. Turning slowly, he found himself staring into a pair of glowing emerald green eyes. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. From the shadows emerged a figure unlike any he had ever seen. She was tall and slender, with shimmering, silvery skin that seemed to reflect the faint light of the room. Her long, flowing hair moved as if carried by an invisible breeze. She didn't look threatening, but her presence was enough to make James feel small and vulnerable. "James Carter?" she asked, her voice melodic yet commanding. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien girl stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "My name is Lyria," she said. "We don't have much time. Do it now, or never." James blinked, trying to make sense of her words. "Do what? Who are you? And how did you get in here?" Lyria sighed, looking over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. "I'll explain everything, but first, you need to listen. Your life is about to change." James stood, gripping a wrench for protection. "Start explaining, or I'm calling the police." Lyria raised her hand, and a holographic device appeared, floating above her palm. The image displayed an unfamiliar star map, with planets marked in vibrant colors. "I come from Andoria, a planet far from your solar system. I need your help, James. Your skills are unique, and I have no one else to turn to." "My skills?" he asked, frowning. "I'm just a mechanic. You've got the wrong guy." "You're not just a mechanic," she said sharply. "You're an innovator. Someone who sees solutions where others see problems. That's exactly what I need." James opened his mouth to argue but stopped when the hologram shifted. It now showed a sleek, futuristic spaceship being pursued by smaller, aggressive-looking crafts. Explosions lit up the screen. "That's my ship," Lyria said, her voice softer. "I barely escaped. They're after me, James, and if they find me, it won't just be my life that ends. It could be the end of something much bigger." James felt his pulse quicken. "Who's after you?" Lyria hesitated before answering. "Intergalactic bounty hunters. They've been hired by powerful enemies who want to ensure I don't complete my mission." "And what's your mission?" he asked, still skeptical. "To stop a war," she said simply. Her eyes burned with determination. "A war that will destroy countless worlds, including Earth." James laughed nervously. "This is insane. I fix drones and build custom gadgets. I'm not a hero, and I don't know anything about stopping wars." Lyria stepped closer, her voice urgent. "You don't have to be a hero. You just have to trust me. I can give you access to technology and knowledge that will revolutionize everything you know. In return, I need your help to complete one task. Just one." James hesitated, his mind racing. He wanted to dismiss her as crazy, but the intensity in her eyes made it impossible. She wasn't lying. At least, she didn't seem to be. Before he could respond, a loud bang echoed through the workshop. The metal door at the back of the room shook violently. James turned toward it, his grip tightening on the wrench. "What was that?" "They found me," Lyria whispered, her voice laced with fear. "Who?" James asked, but his question was answered as the door burst open. A group of armored figures stormed in, their weapons glowing with an ominous blue light. "Hand her over, human," one of them growled, his voice mechanical through his helmet. Lyria grabbed James's arm. "We have to go. Now." James stared at the intruders, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear. His quiet life was over. Dropping the wrench, he grabbed a small, makeshift EMP device from his workbench. "Follow me," he said, surprising himself with his own decisiveness. Lyria's face lit up with relief as they dashed toward a hidden hatch in the floor. James pressed a button on his device, and the workshop was plunged into darkness. The EMP had disabled the intruder's weapons and gear, buying them a few precious seconds. As they crawled through the narrow tunnel beneath the workshop, James couldn't help but wonder what he had just gotten himself into. But one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. The ultimatum. The tunnel was cold and damp, the only light coming from the faint glow of Lyria's skin. James struggled to keep up with her, his mind racing. Moments ago, he had been repairing drones in his quiet workshop. Now, he was running for his life alongside an alien who claimed the fate of Earth, and possibly the galaxy, depended on him. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into an abandoned subway station. Lyria scanned the area with a small, sleek device. Satisfied that they were safe for the moment, she turned to James. "You're going to need answers," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos they had just escaped. "You think?" James snapped, his nerves frayed. "What just happened back there? Who were those guys, and why are they trying to kill you?" Lyria stepped closer, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "They're bounty hunters, hired by the Council of Dominion. They'll do whatever it takes to stop me." "Stop you from doing what, exactly?" James asked, crossing his arms. "You keep talking about this mission like it's the most important thing in the universe, but you haven't told me anything." Lyria hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Because once I tell you, there's no going back. If you know the truth, you'll be a target too. The Council doesn't leave loose ends." James laughed bitterly. "Newsflash, I'm already a target. Thanks to you, my workshop is probably a pile of rubble, and I'm running from intergalactic bounty hunters. So yeah, I think I deserve the truth." Lyria sighed, then took a deep breath. "All right, you want the truth. Here it is. I'm not just some alien on the run. I'm Princess Lyria of Andoria, heir to the throne of the most advanced civilization in this quadrant of the galaxy." James blinked, staring at her in disbelief. "A princess? You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I were," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "My father, the king, was assassinated by the Council of Dominion. They framed it as an accident, but I uncovered the truth. Now they're consolidating power, preparing to launch a war that will wipe out anyone who resists their rule. My mission is to stop them before it's too late." "And what does that have to do with me?" James asked, his voice rising. "I'm just a mechanic. What can I possibly do to help a runaway princess stop a galactic war?" "You're more than a mechanic," Lyria said firmly. "Humans have something no other species in the galaxy does: an unparalleled ability to think creatively under pressure. I need that creativity to bypass the security system of a Dominion weapons facility. It's the key to stopping their war machine." James shook his head, backing away. "This is insane. You're asking me to go up against an intergalactic government. Do you have any idea how impossible that sounds?" Lyria stepped forward, her expression pleading. "I know it's dangerous, but if we don't try, billions of lives will be lost, including yours. The Dominion won't stop with Andoria. Once they've conquered our sector, they'll come for Earth." James stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always thought of himself as a small cog in a vast machine, but now this alien princess was telling him he might be the key to saving the galaxy. It was overwhelming. "Why me?" he whispered. "Why not someone smarter or more experienced? Why not someone who actually knows what they're doing?" "Because I don't have time to find anyone else," Lyria said, her voice breaking. "And because I believe in you. I've seen what you can do, James. Your work on those drones. It's brilliant. You're the only one who can help me." James felt his heart pounding. He wanted to say no, to walk away and pretend none of this was happening. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. Not when so much was at stake. Before he could respond, a sharp beeping sound came from Lyria's device. Her eyes widened in alarm. They'd found us. We need to move. Again, James groaned, grabbing his bag. How do they keep finding us? They're tracking my biosignature, Lyria said as they ran toward another tunnel. But don't worry. I have a plan. James glanced at her, his skepticism clear. You have a plan? Because your last one worked out great. This one's different, she said, a hint of a smile breaking through her tense expression. We're going to fight back. James stopped in his tracks. Fight back? Against those guys? Are you out of your mind? They won't expect it, Lyria said, pulling out a small metallic sphere from her pouch. This is a quantum disruptor. It'll disable their tech for a short time, giving us a chance to escape and lay low. James hesitated, then nodded. Fine, let's do it. But after this, you're telling me everything. Deal, Lyria said, her smile growing. And James, yeah, thank you. As the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, James gripped the disruptor tightly, bracing himself for what was to come. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again. The deal. The world above was alive with the hum of city life, but below ground, in the labyrinth of old subway tunnels, the air was thick with tension. James leaned against the cold concrete wall, trying to catch his breath. Lyria stood a few feet away, her glowing eyes scanning the surroundings as if every shadow held a threat. You promised me answers, James said, his voice cutting through the silence. No more running, no more half-truths. If you want my help, I need to know everything. Lyria turned to him, her expression both tired and resolute. You're right. You deserve the full story. But first, she pulled a small rectangular device from her belt. It emitted a faint hum as she waved it over both of them. A cloaking field, she explained. It'll mask our presence for a while. They won't find us here. James raised an eyebrow. Convenient. Maybe you should have used that earlier. It has a short range and even shorter battery life, Lyria replied. But right now, it's all we have. James crossed his arms, his frustration mounting. Fine. Let's hear it. Why me? And why is this mission so important? Lyria took a deep breath, her silvery skin catching the dim light. I told you I'm from Andoria, a planet far more advanced than Earth. What I didn't tell you is that Andoria has been under the Dominion's thumb for decades. They control our resources, our technology, even our leaders. My father tried to resist, to negotiate a better future for our people. For that, they killed him. James felt a pang of sympathy, but kept his expression guarded. I'm sorry for your loss, but what does that have to do with me? The Dominion isn't just targeting Andoria, Lyria said, her voice tightening with emotion. They're building a weapon, something powerful enough to subjugate entire star systems. Andoria is just the beginning. Earth is next. James's heart skipped a beat. Earth? Why would they come here? Your planet is rich in a resource they need, Lyria explained. It's called tesserium, a mineral vital for their weapons core. They've already begun covert operations to mine it. Once they have enough, they'll unleash the weapon, and no one will be able to stop them. James ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the information. And you think I can help you stop them? I'm just one guide, Lyria. I don't have a spaceship or an army. You don't need those, she said, stepping closer. What you have is ingenuity. Humans are unpredictable, resourceful. That's why the Dominion underestimates you. They've studied Earth's history, its wars, its technology. They think they know how to defeat you, but they don't understand the human spirit, the drive to protect what you love. James looked at her, skepticism etched on his face. You're asking a lot of me, Lyria. If I help you, I'm putting my life on the line. I need more than just words. I need to know what's in it for me. Lyria hesitated, then nodded. Fair enough. If you help me, I'll give you access to Andorian technology, things that will revolutionize Earth, unlimited clean energy, advanced medicine, faster than light travel. You could change the course of human history, James. You could be the one who brings Earth into the galactic fold. James felt a flicker of temptation. He had always dreamed of making a difference, of leaving a mark on the world. But he wasn't ready to commit just yet. And if I say no? Lyria's expression darkened. If you say no, the Dominion will win. They'll strip Earth of its resources, enslave its people, and leave nothing but ruins. Saying no isn't just turning me away. It's surrendering your planet's future. James exhaled sharply, the weight of her words pressing down on him. You don't leave much room for choice, do you? No, Lyria admitted. Because time is running out. The Dominion's weapon is nearly complete. We have weeks, maybe less, to stop them. I can't do it alone. James, I need you. The sincerity in her voice was impossible to ignore. James knew she wasn't lying. Still, the idea of going up against an intergalactic superpower was terrifying. Before he could respond, Lyria's cloaking device beeped, its light flickering. Her eyes widened. The field is failing. They'll find us soon. Great, James muttered. What now? Lyria pulled a small, glowing sphere from her pouch and handed it to him. This is a neural link. It'll let me share some of my knowledge with you. Languages, schematics, strategies. If we're going to survive, you need to be ready. James eyed the sphere warily. Is it safe? As safe as anything in this situation can be, Lyria said, her tone impatient. Trust me, James. If you're serious about helping, you'll need this. James hesitated, then took the sphere. All right, let's do it. The sphere lit up as he held it, and a surge of information flooded his mind. Images, sounds, and symbols flashed before his eyes, overwhelming yet strangely exhilarating. When it was over, he felt different, stronger, more confident. That was intense, he said, rubbing his temples. You'll get used to it, Lyria said with a faint smile. Now, let's move. We've got a lot of work to do. As they prepared to leave, James couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped onto a path he could never turn back from. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever imagined, but for the first time, he felt like he might be up to the challenge. The chase. The cold wind howled through the night as James and Lyria emerged from a hidden maintenance hatch in the middle of the city's industrial district. The skyline was dominated by towering factories, their chimneys spewing thick clouds of steam. Neon lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting an eerie glow on their faces. James glanced nervously over his shoulder. Are you sure this is safe? We're out in the open. Lyria, her silvery hair shimmering under the city lights, tightened the strap on her utility belt. It's not about being safe. It's about being unpredictable. The bounty hunters are tracking patterns. If we stay underground, we're cornered. Up here, we have options. Options like what? James asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. Getting vaporized in the middle of the street. Lyria shot him a sharp look. Do you ever stop complaining? I've managed to evade them for months. Trust me. Before James could retort, a low, mechanical hum filled the air. Lyria's eyes widened as she grabbed his arm and pulled him into the shadow of a large dumpster. They're here. James peeked around the edge, his heart pounding. A sleek, black hovercraft glided silently above the street, its undercarriage glowing faintly. It moved with the precision of a predator, scanning the area with a beam of light that seemed to cut through the darkness. Great, James muttered under his breath. They have flying death machines. What do we have? Your wits, Lyria whispered, her gaze fixed on the craft. And this. She pulled a small cylindrical device from her pouch. It emitted a faint blue glow. What is that? James asked. A distortion generator, she explained. It'll scramble their sensors for a few seconds, but we'll have to run like hell once it's activated." James sighed. Why is running always the plan? Because staying gets us killed, Lyria said sharply. On my signal, we sprint to that building. She pointed to a nearby warehouse with a flickering neon sign. Ready? Not really, James replied, but she didn't wait for his answer. She pressed the button on the device and threw it into the air. It spun rapidly, releasing a pulse of energy that caused the hovercraft's lights to flicker. Go! Lyria shouted, bolting from their hiding spot. James followed, his heart pounding as they darted across the street. The hovercraft's beam swept past them, but the distortion field held. They reached the warehouse and slipped inside just as the hovercraft began to recover. The inside of the warehouse was a maze of crates and machinery. The air smelled of oil and metal, and the faint hum of generators filled the space. Lyria led the way, her movements quick and deliberate. James struggled to keep up, his breath coming in short gasps. "Do you even know where we're going?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "There's a transport hub on the other side of the district," Lyria said. "If we can reach it, I have a contact who can get us off-planet." "Off-planet," James repeated, his voice rising. "You didn't mention leaving Earth." Lyria stopped and turned to face him, her expression serious. "Do you want to survive? Because staying here isn't an option. The Dominion will keep sending hunters until they catch us. Earth isn't safe anymore." James opened his mouth to argue, but was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps. Both of them froze. The bounty hunters were inside. Lyria motioned for James to stay quiet and crouched low, moving toward the sound. James reluctantly followed, his heart pounding in his ears. They'd reached a stack of crates and peered around the corner. 3 armored figures were scanning the area with handheld devices. "They're sweeping for biosignatures," Lyria whispered. "We need to disable their equipment." "And how do we do that?" James asked, his voice barely audible. Lyria handed him a small disc-shaped device. "Stick this to their scanner. It'll overload the circuitry." James looked at the device, then at the bounty hunters. "You want me to get close to those guys? Are you insane? Do you have a better idea?" Lyria asked, her tone impatient. James gritted his teeth. "Fine. But if I die, I'm haunting you." He crept toward the nearest hunter, his movements slow and deliberate. The hunter was focused on his scanner, the device emitting a soft beep as it searched for their location. James's palms were slick with sweat as he edged closer. When he was within arm's reach, he held his breath and slapped the device onto the scanner. A burst of sparks erupted from the scanner, and the hunter staggered back, shouting in a guttural alien language. James didn't wait to see what happened next. He sprinted back to Lyria, who was already moving toward an exit. The other 2 hunters were distracted by the commotion, giving them just enough time to slip away. As they emerged onto another street, James felt a surge of adrenaline. That was insane. "Welcome to my life," Lyria said, a small smile playing on her lips. "You did well, James. Maybe you're not as helpless as you think." James rolled his eyes. "Yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence." Before they could catch their breath, the sound of engines roared behind them. Another hovercraft appeared, this one larger and more heavily armed. Its spotlight swept across the street, locking onto them. "Run," Lyria shouted, and they took off once more, the hovercraft hot on their trail. This wasn't just a chase anymore. It was a fight for survival. James didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was certain: there was no turning back now. The plan. The safe house was little more than a hollowed-out storage unit tucked into the forgotten corners of the city's industrial zone. Inside, the dim light from a single flickering bulb barely illuminated the cramped space. A rusted table and mismatched chairs sat in the center, surrounded by stacks of old equipment and crates filled with alien artifacts. James collapsed into one of the chairs, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Lyria stood near the door, her glowing eyes scanning a small holographic display in her hand. The soft hum of the device was the only sound in the room. "This can't keep going like this," James said, finally breaking the silence. "We can't just keep running and hoping we'll outrun them. We need a real plan." Lyria glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she said, placing the device on the table. The hologram expanded, showing a detailed blueprint of a massive facility. "That's why I brought you here. It's time to go on the offensive." James leaned forward, studying the hologram. "What is this?" "The Dominion's primary weapons development facility," Lyria explained. "This is where they're building the core for their superweapon. If we can destroy it, we'll cripple their entire operation." James stared at the blueprint, his mind racing. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that? This place looks like a fortress." "It is," Lyria admitted, "but it has vulnerabilities. That's where you come in." James leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Of course it is. Let me guess. Another one of your impossible tasks." Lyria ignored his sarcasm and pointed to a section of the hologram. "The facility's defenses rely on an AI system. It's advanced, but it's predictable. With your ingenuity, we can outsmart it." James frowned. "Outsmart an AI? That's easier said than done. What's the plan?" Lyria's eyes gleamed with determination. "We'll create a diversion to draw their security forces away from the main building. While they're distracted, you'll infiltrate the central control room and disable the AI. Once that's done, I'll plant charges to destroy the core." "Sounds simple enough," James said dryly. "What could possibly go wrong?" "Everything," Lyria replied without missing a beat. "But it's our only chance." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, let's say we pull this off. How do we even get inside? This place probably has more security than the Galactic Senate." Lyria reached into her pouch and pulled out a sleek, metallic wristband. "With this," she said, handing it to him. James examined the device. "What is it?" "A camouflage module," Lyria explained. "It'll let you blend into your surroundings. Not perfect invisibility, but close enough." James raised an eyebrow. "And you've just been carrying this around the whole time?" "It's a prototype," Lyria said. "Limited battery life and a tendency to overheat, but it'll give you a fighting chance." James slipped the wristband on, the metal cool against his skin. "Great. So, when do we start?" "Tonight," Lyria said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The Dominion's security patrols are weakest during the midnight cycle. We'll need to move fast." As the weight of the plan settled over him, James couldn't shake the feeling that this was suicide. But looking at Lyria, her resolve unwavering despite everything she'd endured, he knew he couldn't back out now. Hours later, they stood on a ridge overlooking the facility. The sprawling complex was bathed in an eerie blue light, its towers bristling with weapons and sensors. Automated drones patrolled the perimeter, their searchlights sweeping across the barren landscape. "This is it," Lyria said, adjusting the strap of her gear. "Are you ready?" James swallowed hard. "Not really, but let's do it anyway." Lyria nodded and activated the holographic interface on her wrist. "I'm going to trigger a power surge in their outer defenses. It'll give us a small window to slip through." As she worked, James activated the camouflage module. His body shimmered briefly before blending into the shadows. He glanced at Lyria, who gave him a reassuring nod. "Remember," she said, her voice low, "once you're inside, head straight for the control room. Stick to the plan, and we'll make it out alive." "No pressure," James muttered, his voice barely audible. The power surge hit, and the facility's defenses flickered. Lyria motioned for him to move, and they descended the ridge, their movements silent and precise. They reached the outer wall, slipping through a gap in the security grid just before the drones recovered. Inside, the facility was even more imposing than it had looked from the outside. The corridors were lined with metallic walls, glowing with faint, pulsing light, The air was cold and sterile, the hum of machinery echoing through the space. James followed Lyria's directions, his heart racing as they moved deeper into the facility. The camouflage module held, but he could feel the heat building against his wrist. He couldn't afford to waste time. Finally, they reached the central control room. The door was locked, but Lyria handed him a small device. "This will bypass the encryption. It'll take about 30 seconds. 30 seconds we might not have," James muttered, attaching the device to the control panel. As the device worked, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Lyria readied her weapon, her expression tense. "Hurry." The door slid open just as the footsteps grew louder. James slipped inside, the door sealing shut behind him. The room was filled with monitors and glowing interfaces, the AI core housed in a central column. James moved quickly, following the instructions Lyria had drilled into him. The AI responded, its voice cold and mechanical. "Unauthorized access detected. Initiating lockdown." "Not today," James said, overriding the system with the final command. The AI's voice faltered, then went silent. The room powered down, leaving only the faint hum of emergency lighting. "Control is down," James said into his comm. "You're clear." Lyria's voice came through, filled with relief. "Good work. Get out of there. Now." As alarms blared throughout the facility, James knew the hardest part was still ahead. But for the first time, he felt like they had a real chance. The betrayal. The facility was in chaos. Red emergency lights flashed rhythmically, casting an ominous glow over the metallic corridors. Alarms blared, echoing through the halls as James raced toward the extraction point. His heart pounded in his chest, not from exertion but from the heavy weight of adrenaline and fear. "Lyria, I'm on my way out. What's your status?" he said, his voice strained as he spoke into the comm device. Static crackled before her voice came through. "Charges are set, but the Dominion forces are closing in. I'll meet you at the rendezvous." "Got it," James replied, ducking into a side corridor to avoid a patrol of heavily armed guards. He leaned against the cold wall, catching his breath. The camouflage module on his wrist was overheating, the metal burning against his skin. He ripped it off and tossed it aside. It had served its purpose. As he moved forward, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every plan they had made seemed to be falling apart faster than expected. It wasn't just bad luck. It felt deliberate. The thought hit him like a freight train. Someone had betrayed them. Moments later, James arrived at the extraction point, a dimly lit maintenance bay filled with old, rusting equipment. Lyria was already there, her weapon drawn, and her body tense. Beside her stood Calic, the Andorian smuggler who had agreed to help them for a hefty price. "You're late," Calic sneered, his reptilian eyes narrowing at James. His voice dripped with disdain. "I was starting to think you wouldn't make it." "Traffic was a nightmare," James shot back, his tone sarcastic. He turned to Lyria. "Are we good to go?" Before Lyria could answer, a loud clang echoed through the bay. The three of them turned as a group of Dominion soldiers poured in from every entrance, their weapons raised. James's stomach dropped. "We've been set up," he muttered. Calic took a step back, raising his hands in mock innocence. "Set up? What a wild accusation, human. You sold us out." Lyria snapped, her glowing eyes narrowing into slits. "You promised to get us out of here." "I promised to survive," Calic said, a smug grin spreading across his face. "The Dominion offered me a deal, double your payment and safe passage out of this sector. It was too good to pass up." Lyria's expression darkened. "You're a fool. The Dominion doesn't honor deals. Once they have what they want, you're expendable." Calic hesitated, his grin faltering. "Nice try, princess, but I think I'll take my chances." Before Lyria could respond, the soldiers opened fire. She pushed James behind a stack of crates, returning fire with her energy weapon. "Stay down," she yelled over the deafening noise. James ducked as sparks flew around him. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. He spotted a control panel near the far wall, wires spilling out of its damaged casing. An idea began to form. "Cover me," he shouted to Lyria. "What are you doing?" she demanded, firing at the advancing soldiers. "Buying us some time," James said, crawling toward the panel. He yanked a small toolkit from his bag and began working, his fingers flying over the exposed circuits. He wasn't entirely sure what he was doing, but desperation was a powerful motivator. "What's the plan, genius?" Lyria called out, her voice strained. "Overloading the power grid," James replied, gritting his teeth as he worked. "When I say go, you run like hell." The sound of heavy boots drew closer. James risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the soldiers closing in. He could feel the heat of their weapons as they fired, missing him by inches. Sweat dripped down his face, but he kept working. Finally, the panel sparked, and a loud hum filled the air. The emergency lights flickered wildly, and the soldiers paused, their movements uncertain. "Now," James shouted, diving for cover as the panel exploded in a shower of sparks. The overload sent a shockwave through the bay, knocking the soldiers off their feet and plunging the room into darkness. Lyria grabbed James's arm, pulling him to his feet. "You're insane," she said, her voice a mix of frustration and admiration. "Thank me later," James replied, running alongside her as they headed for the exit. Outside the facility, the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Dominion ships hovered overhead, their searchlights sweeping the area. Lyria led James to a hidden alcove where a small, sleek ship waited. "We're not out of this yet," she said, opening the hatch. "Get in." James climbed aboard, collapsing into a seat as the engines roared to life. Lyria took the controls, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. The ship lifted off, weaving through the Dominion blockade with expert precision. As they broke through the atmosphere and into the vast expanse of space, James let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. Lyria didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the stars ahead, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Calic was right about one thing." "What's that?" James asked. "We can't trust anyone," she said, her voice cold. "From now on, it's just us." James nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. They had survived, but the road ahead was only getting darker. The betrayal had shaken their already fragile trust in the galaxy and each other. But as Lyria set the coordinates for their next destination, James couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They were still alive, still fighting. And as long as that was true, they had a chance. The final showdown. The void of space stretched endlessly around them, punctuated by the faint glow of distant stars. Inside the small ship, tension hung thick in the air. James sat at the co-pilot's station, his eyes fixed on the swirling blue vortex of hyperspace outside the window. Lyria was at the controls, her face illuminated by the soft light of the ship's dashboard. Neither of them had spoken for several minutes. "We're almost there," Lyria finally said, her voice steady but strained. James nodded, gripping the edges of his seat. "What happens if this doesn't work?" "It has to work," Lyria replied without looking at him. "There's no plan B." The ship shuddered as it exited hyperspace, the stars snapping back into focus. Ahead of them loomed the Dominion weapons facility, a massive structure suspended in the orbit of a barren moon. Its sleek, angular design was bristling with weapons and defenses, and dozens of patrol ships swarmed around it like hornets around a nest. James swallowed hard. That's a lot of firepower. Lyria's lips pressed into a thin line. And we're going right into the heart of it. The approach was perilous. Using stolen Dominion codes, Lyria managed to slit them through the outer perimeter undetected. But as they neared the station, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. "Are you sure these codes will hold up?" he asked, glancing nervously at the displays. "They'll hold long enough," Lyria replied. "Once we're inside, we'll have to move quickly. The charges need to be placed on the core within 20 minutes, or the entire station will lock down." "No pressure," James muttered, his hands tightening into fists. The ship docked in a small maintenance bay, its landing gear hissing softly as it touched down. Lyria grabbed her gear and handed James a compact energy pistol. "You remember how to use this?" "Point and shoot," James said, checking the weapon. "Let's hope I don't need to." They slipped out of the ship and into the station's dimly lit corridors. The air was cold and sterile, and the hum of machinery echoed faintly around them. Lyria led the way, her movements precise and deliberate. James followed closely, his heart pounding. As they navigated the maze-like corridors, Lyria stopped abruptly and held up a hand. "Wait," she whispered. James froze, straining to hear what she had detected. A faint clicking sound echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. "Security drones," Lyria said, pulling James into a recessed alcove. She activated a small device on her wrist, emitting a low-frequency pulse that disrupted the drone sensors. The machines floated past them, oblivious to their presence. James let out a shaky breath. "This place is a death trap." "That's why we're blowing it up," Lyria said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. They reached the core chamber with just over 15 minutes to spare. The room was enormous, dominated by a massive, glowing sphere suspended in the center. Energy conduits stretched out from it like the roots of a tree, pulsating with raw power. "This is it," Lyria said, setting down her bag and pulling out the charges. "Once these go off, the entire station will be destroyed." James helped her position the charges, his hands trembling slightly. "What about the Dominion fleet? Won't they notice when this place starts to blow?" "They'll notice," Lyria said grimly. "That's why we need to be off the station before the timer hits 0. As they worked, the sound of boots echoed in the corridor outside. James's stomach twisted. "We've got company." Lyria cursed under her breath. "They must have detected the interference. We need to finish this now." She handed James the last charge. "Place this on the main conduit. I'll cover you." James nodded, his heart racing as he sprinted across the chamber. Lyria opened fire on the incoming guards, her shots precise and deadly. James reached the conduit and attached the charge, activating the timer. "Done," he shouted, turning back toward Lyria. She motioned for him to move. "Get to the ship. I'll hold them off." "No way," James yelled, firing at a guard who had appeared behind her. "We do this together." Lyria hesitated, then nodded. They fought their way back through the corridors, the charges ticking down with every step. The station shook violently as the first explosions rippled through its structure. By the time they reached the docking bay, the alarms were deafening. Flames and smoke filled the air, and the station's artificial gravity was beginning to falter. They boarded the ship, slamming the hatch shut just as another explosion rocked the bay. "Get us out of here," James shouted, strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat. Lyria didn't need to be told twice. She punched in the coordinates for hyperspace, her fingers flying over the controls. The ship shuddered as it lifted off, narrowly avoiding a collapsing support beam. The docking bay doors were closing rapidly, but Lyria managed to squeeze the ship through the gap. As they cleared the station, the core detonated in a brilliant explosion, engulfing the entire structure in a blinding flash of light. James stared at the destruction on the view screen, his chest heaving. "We did it." Lyria slumped back in her seat, her expression weary but triumphant. "We did it." As the ship entered hyperspace, James looked over at Lyria. "What now?" She turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "Now, we rebuild. The Dominion will feel this loss, but they're not finished. This was just the first step." James nodded, a sense of purpose settling over him. "Whatever comes next, I'm in." Lyria's smile grew. "Good, because the galaxy's going to need you." As the stars blurred into streaks of light, James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he believed they might just win.